Let's do it. Hello, everyone. And if you're from Russia, then здравствуйте. And welcome to Understandable English. I am going to continue my informal travel series that helps you learn English while also learning more about the wonderful world around us. I've already done videos about Chechnya and Armenia, so if you missed those, then feel free to check them out. I'll link them in this video or in the description down below. Today, I'm going to tell you a bit about my trip to Kamchatka, which, if you don't know where Kamchatka is, it's here in Russia. I'll put a map right there. And the first thing you might be wondering, especially if you've never heard of this place, is, well, what's my motivation? Why would I want to go to a place this far away from just about anything? Well, hiking in very beautiful nature is one of my favorite things I like to do in my free time, especially when I have a few days or weeks from work that I can spend a good amount of time far away from civilization and checking out the beauty that is in our Earth. It's also just this legendary place. Many people have heard about it from films or from documentaries. If you are Russian, you've probably heard of it because it's this place that, well, many people talk about, but not a lot of people go there. There are people that live there, but it's difficult to get there. And so it has this kind of aura of wonder, of legend to it. And so for me, I also found that, and I thought that it would be interesting to finally see it with my own eyes. Also, when I was a small child, there was this board game, this tabletop game, called Risk. And there was this region over in the top of the world on the right side, or the east side, that was called Kamchatka. And I always thought that that was interesting. What is Kamchatka? What is there? And finally, I got to see with my own eyes what is in this place that I had seen in this tabletop game or board game that I've been playing all of my childhood. Additionally, from all the pictures and videos and documentaries I've seen about this place, it seemed just to be magical. It has volcanoes that are very active, and so for that reason, the world is truly alive there, not just with plants and animals, but the whole world shakes and rumbles and smokes, and it is a magical place to experience. Lastly, it's very similar to Alaska, or at least I've heard, and I have never personally been to Alaska, but my mom has, and she's told me stories about it, and I wanted to see how similar it is. In the end, it's just across the Pacific Ocean from Alaska. But let me tell you more about my trip. I will set the scene for you, that is, tell you the date and the time and where, and I will tell you that it was 2020 and summertime. If you remember what was happening in 2019 and 2020, well, it was COVID. The pandemic was almost at its peak, and I had just gotten out of a lockdown in the city that I was living. 67 straight days I spent inside my apartment. Now, it was a bit strange because, well, I didn't have the right paperwork or the right papers, the documents, to exit my apartment. I had a registration that showed I lived where I worked. So if I was caught outside of my apartment, they would send me to my work, which is very far from the place I lived. And for that reason, I did not want to risk going outside of my house. And so my roommates were wonderful. They ended up buying me food and things that I needed. And so I had to spend 67 straight days inside my apartment. And when I could finally have the ability to leave, I was so excited, so I just flew to Kamchatka. When I finally got there, I got out of the plane, and there wasn't much there. It was a small airport, a small building, and I was supposed to get a COVID test when I got there, on arrival, as we say. So I was looking for the right place, the building. I was asking people, where can I get this COVID test, because I wanted to follow all the rules. And suddenly, they just gave me this document that said I passed my test, that I was ready to go. And so it was very confusing because, of course, I never did a COVID test, but they just gave me this document and said, go this way. So I guess that's how things work in Kamchatka. My plan was to go with a group of people that I had met online. Some people might find this a bit scary, but I think that a lot of people in the world we can trust more than it seems. And so I was ready to take that risk and to go out into nature, into a place far from civilization with these people that I had met online. The first night we spent on the beach of the Pacific Ocean. We wanted to get used to the new time zone. We had jet lag from our long flight, And we wanted to get to know each other, to meet and to understand who we were going to go out into the nature with and who we were going to be with for the next 8 to 10 days. Now, this beach was magnificent. The sands are black, this very dark and small grained sand that was beautiful. And the waves were pounding, the water was cold, we took a swim. I could wave across the ocean to my homeland, across the ocean to Alaska. Though I'm not from Alaska, but it's the United States. So I could wave to the United States from the beach here. And another strange thing that I never expected when I'm hiking or on a backpacking trip was we had caviar, which is typically a luxurious dish that you have at big parties and it's quite expensive. But being on the Pacific coast and having the source of this caviar in Russia to be right next to me, it was very cheap and we were able to take it with us into the nature and have it in a tent when normally I'm used to having it around a table at a big celebration. The next day, we took a huge truck, I think it's called a Kamaz, and it took the only road that is going north. I think that was only one choice. It had asphalt for about, 20 kilometers, and then it was gravel. And we teetered up and down through this winding road into the forest, and we were moving quite slowly up and down, making people a little bit motion sick or car sick. But finally, we got there. We got out of the truck, unloaded our backpacks, the truck drove away, and we were alone. A small group of people who had just met through the internet, 2 dogs, and our backpacks. And we needed to survive for 10 days in this nature that was quite far from anything that could really help us if we needed it. Our goal was to hike around a volcano called Tolbachik and then climb up, come back down, and head back home. But let me tell you a little bit more about Kamchatka because this place is quite magical. It is volcanic, as I said, and for that reason it's very active. It's moving, it changes constantly. It's hard to build roads or railroads because the earth shifts, it changes so much that these roads and railroads would not be useful. The landscape is insane in such a good way. It's flat and luscious green, but then suddenly a huge mountain just rises up out of nowhere. These are the volcanoes, and typically this type of landscape is only there where these active volcanoes are because these volcanoes, well, they rise literally quite out of the earth. And it's very remote. It's far from just about anything, and not a lot of people often go there. You can still see some very old Soviet signs from a long time ago that are still posted. You see very few people. I think that we saw one other group the whole time when we were out there hiking. There were wild animals, bears and foxes, these prairie dog things that scream at you. To me, they sounded like they were screaming like a small child. So sometimes I would go out in the morning to use the bathroom and suddenly I would hear these screams that I thought were children, but actually they were just these prairie dog type of things that lived in holes, and they were talking to each other, telling each other that, well, there's a human coming or there's danger coming. But it was quite interesting to see. The rocks are very strange compared to what I'm used to seeing in the mountains because most of them are very new because of this active volcano sites. There's this strange jelly-like mud and these black volcanic rocks. There are these beautiful rivers that cut through black sand, and the contrast between the dark sands and the dark rocks and these lighter green vegetation and plants is quite beautiful, something that I don't often see in typical mountain scenery. You could climb up into these old craters and look inside. You could watch smoke and steam rise from the active craters. It was something that I had never seen before in my life, and I think is very unique to places with these active volcanoes. The weather was also very unpredictable, more so than it typically is in the mountains. There were clouds and rains and winds that would come out of nowhere very quickly, but typically the early morning views were the best. So if you would wake up early in the morning, you could see the perfect blue skies of these beautiful volcanoes without any clouds breaking them. And that also means that you can see the smoke rising from each of these volcanoes and not mixing with the clouds. But also there were the bugs. These mosquitoes were aggressive and they were everywhere. They would fly and attack all day long. They would even fly into my soup or my food, thinking that it was going to eat something from my soup. It was crazy. The only relief was the cold during the night. These bugs and mosquitoes would sleep during the colder hours of the night. And so early morning, if you woke up, you had this relief from these bugs. But it was quite interesting to see that as the sun would rise up over the mountains, the very second that the sun would come out over the mountain and shine where we were, these bugs would wake up and you'd hear this buzz and this sound that would rise up, and suddenly you were being attacked by thousands of these bugs and mosquitoes. It was, well, very uncomfortable, but very interesting to experience. One of the coolest parts that I remember was this lava field. They said that this volcano, Tolbachik, had erupted about 5 years ago, I think it was, when I was there. And so this whole field of lava had turned into rock, and it was insane. It was so beautiful and so strange, something I had never seen before. It looked like ropes and jelly and some sort of strange mixture of, I don't even know what to say, but it all mixed together and twisted and created these big rocks and fields and caves. And we could even climb down into these caves and look up through these little holes. We could see lakes that formed under the field. It was something I had never seen before, and it was something that was new to me in the fact that I had never climbed into a cave under rocks, and it was something that made me a little bit scared, but I still enjoyed the experience and enjoyed pushing myself through that boundary of fear that normally would hold me back from doing something. Climbing Tolbachik was the end of our trek, and it should have been a very simple mountain, looking at the elevation and the way that we would typically climb, but it was a lot harder for me than I expected. And I ended up asking some of the local people, and they explained that because these are volcanoes, sometimes there are different gases that are coming off, and it makes it harder to breathe than typically on a different mountain. So even though the elevation wasn't that high, it still felt a lot harder than I was used to. So that was also an interesting experience for me. On the way back towards civilization, we went through this dead forest. It was a thriving forest before the eruption of Tolbachik, but all of the ash and the acidity of this volcanic mess, it killed the forest. And so now you just see these dead trees sticking out of what looks like sand or desert, but it used to be a thriving forest. There's also signs of a helicopter crash during the eruption. This happened. And also, a little bit further away, there was another smaller volcano that we climbed up on top of. And it was interesting to see there were these little vents, little holes, where the gases and heat were still escaping. And I took a stick, put the stick in the hole for about 2 seconds, pulled it out, and it was on fire. It was insane to see the heat and the power of these volcanoes. Finally, we got back to civilization, or you could say, or to human settlement, when we got to a village. And what was interesting about this village was that all of these houses had a hot tub or a hot spring. And you wouldn't expect that if you were living anywhere else that was not volcanically active. But because they have so much geothermal heat, all these houses and places had hot tubs. So we could swim and bathe for the first time in these hot waters in order to clean ourselves after our long trek. Our last adventure came on the way back to the main city. We loaded up this old, dusty bus that was probably from Soviet times, and we drove towards the riverhead. This bus was crazy dusty, and I emphasize that because as we went across the bumpy road, all the dust blew up into the air, and it was so thick you couldn't see, you couldn't breathe. It was insane to me. And after finally, I think we were there for an hour, after finally exiting the bus, all of us were so happy to breathe the fresh air again. But we did this in order to go on a rafting trip, to raft down the river just for a little bit of fun before we went back to the city. And this was wonderful. There were so many fish in the river that you could just catch them and make a soup out of the fish. You could see all these animals along the way. You could see bears near the river as we drifted by. It was something that was magically natural. I loved it so much. When we finally got back to the city, we were able to enjoy seafood, which was amazing. There was smoked salmon and squid and Kamchatka crab, caviar, everything you could ever want. And it was pretty cheap because, of course, it's the source. And so we were able to eat like kings, even though we were not spending like kings. The city itself was nothing really too interesting, simply because it's a small city and there's not a lot of access. It's hard to get there other than by boats or by plane. And so for that reason, the city doesn't really grow. But it was still good enough to walk around and enjoy the day. I think that one of the most interesting parts of going on one of these crazy treks with people you meet on the internet and people you don't know beforehand is the way that these friendships grow so quickly and strongly in the period of 10 days when you're out on a hike. These people that I didn't know one bit before I came became very close to me, and we ended up meeting up in other cities as I went through other trips along Russia. I ran a marathon with one of them in Moscow. I've gone on ski races and ski marathons with someone. I've visited their cities and they visited me. And even Katya, who was on this channel giving the interview about learning English, she was on this trip, and that is where I met Katya. So yeah, I just want to wrap up this episode by emphasizing this wonderful fact about friendship and taking those calculated risks about what you can do and how you can explore the world with new people and meet new people. If you are Russian, then again, hello. If you know a Russian, please feel free to share this video with them. I would hope that they can be interested in learning both English and about their country if they've ever been to Kamchatka at the same time. If you've ever been to Kamchatka, if you've ever dreamed of going there, please tell me in the comments and I'd love to discuss it with you. If you learned something new, feel free to like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next travel vlog. Toodles.